Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I am your host, Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good, and so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. If you are new to the podcast, then this is a show where I read a chapter of a book that I've written, and then talk about how that chapter got written, or the process of writing a book, or any number of sort of behind the scenes aspects of the writing of this story that kind of bleeds into the writing of a lot of different books as well, kind of all the things that go into that. So if you are the kind of person who likes to see how things get made, this is a good show for you to hang out and join us for. We're in the middle of a book that I wrote called Shell Game, which is a sequel to a book called Showdown in the Yukon. And it's Shell Game is part 2 of the Pearl Saga. It's sort of a standalone, so you don't have to have read the Showdown in the Yukon book to understand this story. It does sort of help, but it's not mandatory that you do that. Showdown in the Yukon is out on audiobook and print book. It's in hardcover now for all the things. It takes about a month. I don't know why Amazon's doing it that way, but it takes about a month to get a hardcover book. It takes about a week to get the paperback, but whatever. But you can also go back to past episodes of this podcast and catch up on all the Showdown in the Yukon stuff. But here's where we are with Shell Game. Shell Game is more of a crime noir book, and our detective, his name is Evan Gold. And the thing that's going on right now, he's got a lot of problems that he's dealing with. The biggest one is he was hired by this client who is acting very shifty. She has changed her name several times, and she is possibly one of the last people to have seen his partner before he got shot and killed just last night. There were a couple of murders in this small Kansas town, and Evan is trying to figure out who did it because the police think he did it. So he's very incentivized to try to solve this mystery. In the meantime, his marriage is falling apart, and he's trying to stitch that back together. His business is falling apart, and he's trying to stitch that back together as well. And he's also tripped across this mysterious pearl in a sack of jewelry that he purchased at a flea market, and is trying to figure out what on earth is going on with this thing, and what is it? How does it want to interact with my life? Because it keeps talking to him. And so there's sort of this fantastical thing that he's trying to wrestle down too. When we left the story last time, he had re-engaged with his client. She's going by the name Claire Porter, and he's trying to get from her what on earth happened last night so he can start to put truth to reality and see how he can get the police off his back and solve the mystery of who killed his partner, Gabe Silver. So that's where we are as we start chapter 13 of Shell Game, and we will hear that chapter right after we listen to this week's sponsors. Chapter 13. Claire Porter drew a deep breath and walked away from the window before continuing. I met Mr. Charles at the Broadway like we'd arranged, like I told you and Mr. Silver that morning, and we went for a walk. It was damp and I got chilled, so I asked that we go by my hotel room to pick up a wrap. Then we got some dinner. I asked the man to seat us by the window so Mr. Silver could get a good look at me with Jason. I remembered that was something you both asked of me. I had to make up some excuse about looking at the quaint scenery because Mr. Charles wanted to sit in the dark corners of the dining room, but eventually he agreed. What happened next? We had dinner. We talked. We left the restaurant and walked some more. Then Mr. Charles dropped me off at my hotel around 11. Then what? Evan asked. Claire shrugged. I don't know. I said goodbye to Mr. Charles and watched him leave. I saw Mr. Silver. I wasn't looking for him. He just caught my eye here and there. A moment later, I saw Mr. Silver walk out after Jason. That's the last I saw either of them till their faces showed up in the paper. Evan turned his nose up to the ceiling and thought for a moment before saying, "You said yesterday that Charles was staying at the Broadway," Evan said. Claire said, "That's right." Evan put his hand to his chin and scratched his stubble. "I wonder, then, why Charles' body ended up so far away from there. I wonder what he was up to. You're new here, but trust me when I say that where they found Charles' body is not in a direct line between the Gloria and the Broadway." He mused a moment longer before asking, "What did you do after you saw Charles leave?" "I went up to my room, changed my clothes, and went to bed. I can tell you that I found most of my interactions with Mr. Charles quite draining, and it was already so late. Then I woke up, read the paper that was outside my door. I confess terror filled me, seeing both of their faces in the headlines saying they had been shot. I don't know what I thought, but I guess I wondered if I would be next. I knew I needed to move addresses, so I got dressed, quickly made my way here, secured this apartment under the name Wolf, went back to the Gloria, paid my bill, and the rest you know." "Why would seeing their faces make you so afraid? Maybe they killed each other," Evan spitballed. "Two things," Claire said, making her way back to Evan. "First, the newspapers said where their bodies were found. As you say, I'm not familiar with this town, but the article made it sound like they were far apart." "And the other thing?" Evan asked. "Someone had searched my room," Claire said without blinking. Evan cocked his head to one side before asking, "When in all of this do you think that happened?" "When I was at your office yesterday morning," Claire said, and then her eyes went wide. "I suppose I should have mentioned that earlier?" Evan smiled at her and settled on the arm of the sofa. "Should I assume from what you said that you and this Charles character had a past?" Claire nodded. "Romantic?" "We were close, but not that close," she said. Evan said. "So you wanted him followed. Since this wasn't about your missing father, why would you want us to do that?" Claire looked at him. Her face said she had something to say but was too scared to put words into reality. Evan said, "I need a line on Jason Charles, Claire. Listen, I don't want to drag anything out of the closet that needs to stay in there. But if I can't even arrange the dots to look like the possibility of a picture, believe me, the police will do just that. And trust me, their conclusions may not lead to a place you or I want to be." She drew a sharp breath. "I met Mr. Charles in Colorado. We had some business dealings there. It went poorly, and we needed to get out of town. We decided to meet up here. We arrived separately. He promised to help me out of a jam, but then I found out he was planning to betray me." "Another woman?" Evan asked. Claire just shook her head. "Why did you want him followed?" Evan asked. "Oh," she sighed. "I wanted to know what he was up to when I wasn't around. I wanted to know how far he'd taken his plan, where he was staying, with whom he was meeting, that kind of thing." Evan looked at her in the eye. "Do you think Charles killed Silver?" "I wouldn't put it past him for sure. Jason Charles was not a stable man. If he suspected he was being followed, if, say, Mr. Silver wasn't as careful as he could have been, who knows what a spooked Jason Charles might do." Claire finished off her glass of water and set it on the table. "Do you know what kind of gun Charles carried?" Evan asked. "He was a collector of odd and hard-to-come-by guns," Claire said. "I've never been interested in them and couldn't tell you one gun type from another." Evan rubbed his chin and looked at his shoes. "Here's something you might find interesting about Gabe's murder. I can't quite get my mind around it, but Gabe's gun was still in his holster when his body was pulled from the river. No missing bullets," Evan said. "Stranger still, Charles also had an unused gun in his holster." Claire looked at him. Her forehead continued to pucker. "You mentioned you don't keep track of guns, but did he mention any? Try to remember. Did he call his guns anything around you?" Evan asked. She shrugged. "I really can't help you. I always thought it was a kind of sickness. Jason talked a lot about guns. He loved guns. But I've never thought one moment about them." She laughed to herself as she remembered. "He told me he'd gone out west to be a bouncer at a saloon. You know, something out of the dime books boys read. Ends up getting attached to this big deal gambler out in Colorado. One thing leads to another, and he's this gambler's bodyguard. I don't know what, but something distasteful happened between them, and the gambler disappeared like a ghost. Jason was always looking over his shoulder. He always kept several guns on him in case he should run into the gambler again or one of his associates. Is that right? Evan said. Yeah, said Claire. In fact, that gambler was so much inside Jason's head that at night, Jason would always spread empty tuna cans by the door to his room so he would know if someone was trying to sneak in. Sounds like he was quite the catch for you, Evan smirked. He wasn't so bad, she said. If he stayed loyal, maybe this whole thing never would have happened. Evan took Claire's hands. So how bad off are you? About as bad as you could think, she said. Her cheeks were suddenly flushed and there was tragic sobriety to her features. I hate to tell you this, Claire, but you keep associating with the Mr. Charles of this world and someday you're going to meet a fate like his, Evan said. I know, she sobbed, pulling away from him. I know. Evan slapped his hands on his thighs and stood up. He rubbed the back of his neck and began pacing the room again. This is no good, he said eventually. I got nothing to go on. With urgency in his voice, he swung back around and said, Who killed Charles? Claire just shook her head. Why did the two of you travel here from Colorado separately or otherwise? He asked. Claire just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes. Evan put his hands on his hips. This is hopeless. I don't know how you expect me to help you keep your pretty neck out of the gallows if you won't come clean with me. She continued to shake her head and mouthed, I can't. You know they're coming for you, yes? Evan asked her. Else why would you be worried? Whoever did this, the gambler, whoever did this, they're coming for you. And you can't, you won't tell me why. Between you and me, sister, these people don't play clean. Changing your name and moving addresses will distract them only for so long. I can't help you if you don't bring the goods. You don't bring the goods, you're gonna have to take your chances with them yourself. I can't stand here and hold your hand while you're willing to walk to the gallows or worse. I know, she said, talking through her tears. I know I'm difficult. You're right about everything you've said. I shouldn't have brought you and Mr. Silver into this. I should just take my chances on my own. Claire collapsed on the sofa and closed her eyes. Oh, Evan, I'm so tired. So very tired. You should leave me here and not look back. Evan sucked his teeth and wrinkled his nose and then, gah, exploded from his mouth, and he poured himself a glass of water. After finishing it off in one swallow, he slammed the glass down and asked, How much money you got on you? Claire answered weakly, About 500. Give it to me, Evan said. Claire stood up silently and made her way to the bedroom. A few moments later, she reappeared and held out the bills to Evan. He took them from her and made a quick count of them. You're a little light. There's only 400 here. A girl has to have some money to live, she pleaded. You can't take everything. Can't you get any more? Evan asked. Claire shook her head. Sell something? He tried again. No, Claire said, indicating the sparse dwelling. None of this is mine. The place came furnished. You want to be free from the people after you or not? Evan's tone started to show signs of impatience. Claire handed over the remaining bills. Evan recounted the money, peeled off $50, folded the bills over his thumb, and handed them to Claire. She took them and wrapped her delicate fingers around them. Evan went to the table and picked up his hat. I'm going out to drum up some information. I'll come back and let you know what I find. When I come back, you'll know it's me when I ring the bell 5 times in a row. Claire smiled broadly. Like the song, 5 gold rings. Evan Gold looked at Claire, placed his hat on his head, winked at her, and shut the door behind him. So longtime listeners of this podcast know that one of the helps that I have received in trying to put some books together was through an editing philosophy by a guy named Sean Coyne called The Story Grid. There's a whole podcast. Right now, if you tune into the Story Grid podcast, they're in some deep weeds as far as story structure and a whole bunch of stuff. So I personally recommend go back to the very beginning of the show. If you're interested, you're listening to a fledgling writer of fiction talk to a very experienced developmental editor on how story structure works and how to get started writing a novel. But currently, it is some deep weeds. But I still enjoy it. But anyway, one of the things that this long-term editor, Sean Coyne, recommended was to keep your chapters to what he called potato chip length. There's I can't remember now if it's Ruffles, Lay's, or Pringles, who had the slogan of "You can't eat just one." And so the idea in writing a chapter, I think similar to writing a newspaper article, you want to write so that people read the next thing. So in a newspaper article, you write a really great headline so that people read the first sentence. And the first sentence, you spend a lot of time on the first sentence so people read the second sentence, and so on until you put all the gobbledygook down in the bottom, because most people don't read a whole newspaper article, so you put your best stuff at the front. Similarly, with book writing, you want to end a chapter so that people don't go, oh, well, I feel satisfied, I'm going to go on to the next thing. No, you try to write it with an era of, well, how do I write to, they want to go into the next chapter and finish the book and the whole thing, very binge-watchy kind of thing. Like, you always try to end on some level of cliffhanger without wearing people out with like, what's going to happen? Anyway, this chapter is largely, it doesn't fit into that. So he tried to keep his potato chip length between 1,500 and 1,700 words. And this conversation between Claire and Evan really is much longer than that. So I had to find a spot to break the conversation, and that was the end of chapter 12. And now we get into chapter 13 and hear Claire's version of what happened last night with all of the things between Gabe Silver, Jason Charles, the killings, and all that kind of stuff. So that is, if you have not listened to last week's episode 12, and have wondered what is happening, go back to episode 12. You'll have a good time. It'll make more sense that way. But one of the interesting things to work out with this style of book, this crime noir, is I really like a good whodunit. My mom got me hooked on them very early, and if you can find a good one, they are just delicious. I'm a terrible problem solver, or a puzzle solver, or whatever those things that like people who go to what are those game rooms called, where you are locked in a room and try to solve 1,000 puzzles to get locked out of the thing, or get out of the room, escape rooms. I think I would enjoy going with a group of people who enjoy that kind of thing, but I would be stuck in that room for the rest of my life. I'm just not good at that kind of stuff. But that is the kind of thing that a mystery and a crime noir is. It is a giant series of puzzles, and on one end, that's really difficult for me and my brain, because you have to set up enough puzzles with enough facts and truth and consistency so that somebody can go along with the flow. And if you're like me, you're just following all the red herrings and the rabbit trails, and you're just enjoying the discovery of who actually did it. Possibly you'd go back later and read it a second time and see if all of the truth bears out, if all of the facts really were there and the author didn't drop in the butler did it when there was no butler for 5/6 of the book. So there needs to be enough consistent truth that the puzzle really can get solved. But we're also dealing with people, which in this case largely means liars. So there needs to be enough not truth so that you can later look back and go, oh, that's where the lie was, or this is where the lie was, or whatever. And Claire is attached to a whole group of people that we'll get to starting with next week's chapter of liars. And there's a thing that I got trained in as part of my job working at the church that I work at, that was on counseling. And one of the skills that was learned in that is that it is, and it's not always the case that someone is bold-faced lying when this happens, but somebody comes to you as a pastor with a problem. Marriage is on the rocks. They're into some kind of habit they need to get out of. There's some kind of other relationship thing they got to work out. And they come with what's called a presenting problem. And, that's what they've come to talk to you about. And if you dig a little bit, you might find out more about the story, but what they're going to say is very self-protective. They're in the right, the other person is in the wrong. And even if they're not intentionally trying to do that, we just all kind of lie. Not always maliciously, but there's a level of we want to make ourselves look justified and all those kinds of things. And that's exactly what Claire is doing. And it is our job as the reader, and certainly Evan's job as the detective, to get to peel back all the layers of the onion to what is the actual objective truth that really what are the events that really happened that led to the murders of Gabe Silver and Jason Charles. Who is at fault, who is an associate or an assistant in making those things happen. If justice is going to be done, we've got to sort of unravel all this thing. And for the reader, the fun is making the puzzle difficult enough that the ride to the end of the story was enjoyable, but also making it not impossible to solve and be frustrating, so that when you get to the end, you're like, that's so stupid. One nice thing about that Claire and the band of people that she will eventually get associated with being just liars, kind of overtly, is a problem that I have as a writer is how do I know what the real story is, right? And then how do I put false words into somebody's mouth while also putting truth in their mouth, and not give away things, or not just like have a full confession in chapter 13 and have a very short, not very satisfying mystery, all those kinds of things. That gets very difficult. And then over the course of, this book is, I think, roughly 90,000 words. So how do I keep all of the facts straight? And I know lots of authors have very copious outlines, and I'm just not that way. So one of the nice things about all of the lying that we're about to get into in this story is that it allows for grace in the story plot hole problem of, well, you told this story this way this time in chapter 13, and then someone else is going to tell their version of the story in another chapter, and they don't exactly line up. And some of that is writer error, and some of that is, well, your characters are liars, so it works out that way. So if you're trying to keep all your stories straight, and like your plot holes glued up super tight, this might be a good avenue for you to go. Just write a lot of liars, and then you can they were lying. That's why there's that plot hole there. The next, like right now, I'm in the middle of trying to wrap up this Pearl Saga series. And the next book that I hope to write is very, very, very different. More like not a romance, because that sounds a little tawdry, but something like a Nicholas Sparks level of romance story. And I don't imagine a lot of lying going on in that particular book. And so the plot holes may show themselves a little more evidently because I'm not hiding it. They're in photography. I think this isn't why old detective things were shot in black and white film. But if you want to hide a lot of your color correction mistakes in photography, just make it black and white. It hides all kinds of sins, and possibly writing a bunch of liars solves some other problems as well. The last thing I'll leave you with is the last bit of this chapter with 5 gold rings was just a happy accident. I've said this before, but sometimes you write stuff in the writing process just to amuse yourself. And I figured he needed to have some kind of signals so that Claire knew who was safe to let into the apartment and who wasn't safe to let into the apartment. And, I didn't know what the exact signals should be. And it hit me. His last name is Gold. Let's just have him ring 5 times, and then she picks up on the joke. Whether he intends it or not, I don't know. But I enjoyed the 5 gold rings thing. So that's where that came from. I thank you for being a part of the show this week, and I invite you back here next week as well. I'm in the middle, just so you know, of trying to revamp my website. I've run into some, I don't know how websites do this. Like you get everything working and then you leave it alone and it's broken. So I've run into a couple things where I've noticed systems have not been working the way I think that they should be working. And so I'm in the process of fixing that, but I do this show and write the books sort of in my hobby spare time. So it's much more slow going than I would like, but please bear with me on that as we try to get stuff going. If you would like to reach out to me, you can reach me through my email address, which I will put in the show notes for this episode. If you would like to get my newsletter, that's one of the systems that's currently broken. Just email me there and I will manually add you to the list. And then you can start jumping in on all the things and the giveaways that I have. I can send those to you as well. So if you would like to pick up copies of the book, you can do over at brianthomascrop.com or on Amazon. If you would like to leave a rating and review for this show or for any of my books, I would certainly appreciate that. It is through your reviews and your comments that all of the workings of the interwebs let other people know that things that they're interested in, this might be one of those things too. So I would appreciate that. Between now and next time we get together, I hope you have a great week.